is only understood as a democracy and corruption. Democracy is only understood as a form of organization, which is narrow. It is more a kind of learning, a means of seeking truth, and a means of preventing corruption. The whole process of democracy is the means to realize people's power and happiness. People believe that there are many reasons for corruption, such as the level of economic development, system problems, power concentration, personal quality, and moral level, supervision mechanism, and so on. The reason why things rot is undoubtedly due to conditions such as lack of sunlight and darkness. Human corruption is caused by lack of sunlight, privacy, or concealment for the same reason, and has no necessary relationship with the level of economic development. Otherwise, backward primitive communism would not exist. The essence of power concentration is a kind of exercise of power by a small number of people or individuals, that is, the exercise of power is not open and lacks sunlight. Supervising from another angle is also to expose power to the sun. Personal quality and moral level, this is also sunshine power in disguise. Democracy, which is often talked about by everyone, is a kind of supervision, whether it is majority democracy or minority democracy, or it allows everyone to understand the operation process of the object. Democracy is not only respect for everyone's rights, but also a process of jointly exploring the truth, at least the truth, and a process of jointly understanding things or objects and achieving goals. As for power, the power of democracy is the power of sunshine. The process of human historical development is a process of civilization improvement. Democracy, the way of operation and organization, is exactly the means to promote civilization. However, due to the existence of different interest groups or different classes and strata, including different people's cognitive and moral levels are inconsistent, the power of sunshine is often misinterpreted or used, or it is purely absent from the sunshine of power. Instead, it became a private tool, which led to varying degrees of corruption. Social reality and truth have become a fog. The development of democracy is consistent with the development of the spirit of the times. Different times and systems, democracy itself is a kind of sunshine with limitations. Although there are unsatisfactory ones, it is sunshine after all. Therefore, power with democracy is much less corrupt than power without democracy. Corruption is basically all related to power, and the fight against corruption undoubtedly starts with power. The essence of power is to serve the people, and it is operated by people. If you want the sunshine, it is undoubtedly the sunshine of power on the one hand, and the sunshine of people with power on the other. Only by expanding and liberating the sunshine of the two, can corruption be minimized as much as possible. This is the substantive anti-corruption, the love for the people and the protection of officials themselves. These two are further discussed below. Sunshine and democratization of power itself. In a certain historical period, there are ethnic differences and contradictions, and even contradictions between the enemy and ourselves. It is impossible to run everything in the sun, which will inevitably lead to the concealment of power and the corresponding period of limitation. Based on this, we should clearly define the scope of such powers to ensure the operation of social politics and economy. But the vast majority of things can be operated by sunshine, and should be dealt with by the power of sunshine, such as democracy, supervision, and so on. The sources of people who use power should be broadened. Civil servants are a common occupation, and officials should not all be civil servants, and even civil servants should not be officials. However, the reality is that officials are civil servants, and civil servants have a 95% or even higher probability of being officials. In other words, civil servants have basically become the only channel for officials, and the essence has been cultivating a bureaucratic group that should not be bureaucrats for a long time. Officials should be a gathering of people from all walks of life, whether you are in education or business, whether you are a courier or a doctor, as long as you meet a set basic condition, you should have the right to apply for officials, participate in social management. Thereby weakening the officials themselves, weakening the idea of official standard, thereby strengthening the service function of democracy, and practicing the substantive, rather than formalized, democracy of the whole process. This is conducive to anti-corruption, and is conducive to serving the people. One of the purposes of the communists is to serve the people wholeheartedly. Only when her managers come from all walks of life of the people, rather than from within a long-established bureaucratic team, can they break the bureaucracy. Of course, this alone is not enough. Not only should there be a corresponding system, but there should also be a corresponding vanguard to lead and generate a corresponding spirit of the times. On this basis, we will gradually crack down on corruption, so as to better serve the people and revive China. In short, democracy in a certain era is limited sunshine, but democracy in the whole process is not only the expansion of quantity, but also the improvement of quality. In this way, when technology advances to a certain level, people's power can be better exerted, better and faster improve people's happiness. Definition of corruption. The study of any social phenomenon must be based on a clear definition of its concepts. For the concept of corruption, different scholars have made various definitions from different angles. Generally speaking, they can be classified into three categories. 1. Public office-centric definitions that view corrupt practices as a breach of the norms of public office. 2. Market-centric definitions, which summarize corruption in terms of economic gain. 3. Public interest-centered definitions, which attribute corruption to the encroachment of public interests. Of these, Joseph Nye's definition centered on public office is the most frequently cited definition. Nye argues that corruption is an act that deviates from the norms and obligations of a public role because of consideration of private, family, closely related private group, interests in terms of money and social status, or in violation of certain rules for personal gain. These behaviors include bribery, the use of compensation to change the judgment of a responsible person, nepotism, granting patronage for special relationships rather than talents and virtues, and public misappropriation, illegal appropriation of public resources for private use. This article will also use Nye's definition. The relationship between country size and political corruption. Asia is one of the regions with severe corruption in the world, but Singapore and Hong Kong have become models of global anti-corruption governance with relatively high scores in the Corruption Perception Index. Domestic voices for learning from the experience of Singapore and Hong Kong are also considerable. However, the successful experience of Singapore and Hong Kong, due to its particularity, the extremely small size of the city, cannot provide a general guiding significance for the governance of corruption in major countries. Specifically, the anti-corruption measures in Hong Kong and Singapore are actually not innovative compared with other Western clean countries such as Canada, Australia, and the Nordic countries. Their anti-corruption measures mainly lie in three aspects. Establish powerful anti-corruption agencies, generally appointed by the top leader, and only accountable to the top leader, and not under the command and jurisdiction of anyone, such as the Corruption and Corruption Bureau in Singapore and the Independent Commission Against Corruption in Hong Kong. A sophisticated anti-corruption legal system. Strict civil service system. Objectively speaking, the top countries in the Global Corruption Perception Index rankings are basically small countries. Due to their small size and small population, these countries are basically in the model of a large society and a small government. The bureaucratic system structure is relatively simple, so objectively they lack the soil that produces large-scale corruption, even in countries with large land areas like Australia and Canada. Due to the vast land and sparse population, the establishment of government agencies is actually relatively simple. As a big country with a large land area, a dense population and a developed economy, China is not comparable to these countries, but it is more comparable to a populous country with a similarly developed bureaucracy. Because, due to the large land area and large population, the country will inevitably need a more complex, huge bureaucratic system and more public officials to manage. According to the basic principle that the more complex a system is, the more likely it will cause problems, complex bureaucracies are inherently more challenged by corruption. Among the top 10 countries with the largest population in the world, only the United States and Japan rank high in the Corruption Perceptions Index, and other countries are facing serious corruption problems. Among them, countries with a large territory such as India rank 85th, Brazil ranks 69th, Mexico ranks 103rd, Indonesia ranks 107th, and Russia ranks 136th. The impact of country size on corruption can be seen. In fact, the United States and Japan are also facing their own corruption problems, only due to the particularity of their political systems and political cultures and the objective flaws in the Corruption Perception Index. The Global Corruption Perception Index released by Transparency International every year is measured by entrepreneurs, risk analysts, and the general public are the subjects of the survey. According to their experiences and feelings, countries are scored from 10 to 0. The higher the score, the lower the corruption level. The influence of the special political culture of the country where the country is located, so some substantive corruption is likely to be ignored, making the domestic corruption problem less prominent and obvious, and this is what the next part of this article will mainly discuss. Comparative politics, corruption in great powers. There is a general misunderstanding about the relationship between corruption and democratic politics, that is, democratic countries are less prone to political corruption, and democratic systems are effective measures to limit corruption. In fact, as discussed in the previous section, for large countries with large populations and complex bureaucratic systems, corruption is inevitable even in democratic countries. Typical examples are the United States, Japan, and South Korea. Although the United States, the banner of political democracy in the world, and Japan, the most successful democratic country in Asia, have always been at the forefront of the Global Corruption Perception Index rankings, in fact, due to its special domestic political system and political cultural traditions, although the indicators are corrupt, there are few phenomena in the two countries, but substantial corruption phenomena are not uncommon and have had a profound impact on domestic political operations and political life. The observation of these neglected characteristic corruption phenomena is helpful for a deeper and more comprehensive understanding of corruption phenomena and China's corruption problems, so this part will introduce the corruption problems in the United States, Japan, and South Korea, which is similar to Japan and analysis, and finally compare it with Germany, which has a well-developed bureaucracy but a low level of corruption. Unique political culture, lobbying political corruption. As the captain of the democratic world, the United States has always used its regularly elected government, detailed laws, sound judicial system, and developed news media as reasons to limit official behavior, control corruption, and promote non-democratic countries. However, the exposure of Hillary Clinton's series of political scandals before the current U.S. election, and the revelation of Abramoff's lobbying corruption case in early 2006 all show that the United States is actually facing serious and substantive political corruption problems. Lobbying is essentially a transaction and reciprocal behavior among congressmen, government bureaucrats, and interest groups. With the development of capitalist economy, money and sex enter the political process under the cover of lobbying and cause political corruption. The main manifestation of lobbying corruption is that interest groups provide convenience, enjoyment, or funding to politicians through lobbyists in exchange for politicians' attention and preference in legislation. In this process, the lobbyist and the lobbied colluded with each other, looked for legal flaws and even ignored the law, and used each other for their own self-interest. Due to the political legitimacy obtained by the U.S. lobbying industry in accordance with the Constitution, the corruption phenomenon caused by lobbying does not appear in the name of corruption, but is observed and recognized as a special political phenomenon in the United States. Although lobbying itself is legal, the essence of lobbying activities that various interest groups gain unbalanced advantages through improper means in political operations is a real act of corruption. Therefore, it is interesting that although the political culture of lobbying in the United States has a long history and deep roots, and there are criticisms of its negative impact on the political order, it has never become a corrupt behavior that has been severely criticized and resisted by the whole society. The phenomenon of the influence of special political and cultural traditions on the cognition of corruption is instructive for us to understand the phenomenon of corruption in China. Structural corruption, clean democracy and politician corruption. In Asia, Japan, and South Korea, which are successful examples of post-war democratic transformation in the United States, have relatively less political corruption and cleaner bureaucracies than China, and the Global Corruption Perception Index seems to confirm this view. But in fact, similar to the United States, the unique political systems and political traditions of the two countries have produced characteristic structural corruption problems, and have had a serious negative impact on their domestic political equality. In general, the coexistence of relative integrity of civil servants and corruption of politicians is the most important feature of structural corruption in Japan and South Korea. On the surface, with the advancement of modernization, the traditional authoritarian political systems of Japan and South Korea have gradually transformed into a democratic modern bureaucratic system. After the political transformation, the country's crackdown on corruption has gradually been institutionalized, and bureaucratic corruption has been effectively controlled, but on the one hand, the problem of political corruption has gradually become prominent. In South Korea, which is in the process of transition, bribery, corruption, and money politics have become prominent, and political rent-seeking behavior has become a profound social problem. Institutions donate money, while politicians give preferential treatment and favor to enterprises in economic activities. In South Korea, many presidents have been accused of corruption by themselves or their relatives. For example, Roh Moo-hyun raised more than $654 million during his tenure, of which 367 million came from 35 chaebols. The fall of the Park Geun-hye government and nationwide protests have highlighted South Korea's corruption problem. Structural corruption in Japan is manifested in that, on the one hand, the incidence of corruption in middle and low-level bureaucracies is relatively low, and bureaucratic corruption is firmly controlled within an institutionalized framework. Behaviors generally occur at high political levels. In Japanese history, there have been many incidents of politicians accepting bribes and taking advantage of their positions for personal gain and fraud. The political impact of the cabinet. In general, in Japan, the problems caused by individual officials' dereliction of duty or illegal behavior are not serious, but the cooperation model between the government and large enterprises in Japan has become a universal and decisive important content in economic, political, and social life. A government enterprise political corruption network, even if a high-ranking official or a person in charge of the enterprise falls from the network, it will still not affect the effectiveness of the entire corruption network. This network has made political corruption in Japan stable and continuous. Japan's unique down-to-earth system is the embodiment of this characteristic mode of government-business cooperation. Under the down-to-earth system, retired officials can use their identities, experience, and influence to obtain higher-level positions and salaries in private companies as a guarantee of economic life after retirement, use the network and influence of former officials to obtain special sources from relevant departments, and coordinate when necessary through the familiar relations of government departments. This kind of characteristic social rules, as a kind of substantive political corruption, is not defined as corrupt behavior in real life, but is regarded as an unwritten political unspoken rule, and the country's characteristic political activities are therefore excluded from the notoriety of corruption. The issue of structural corruption in Japan and South Korea raises a profound and interesting thought, that is, the difference between bureaucratic corruption and politician corruption. We found that in the context of democratic politics, bureaucratic corruption of civil servants in the bureaucratic system has received great attention and containment. It can be said that under a sound democratic system, the probability of bureaucratic corruption will be greatly reduced, but as for the situation is different when politicians are corrupt. Although no one is willing or daring to publicly support politicians' cooperation with other social groups before and after elections, it is not corruption but a reasonable and legal social contract. Corruption in transactions will be regarded as an unavoidable behavior in political activities under a democratic system, and thus be forgiven and actively ignored to a certain extent. However, in non-democratic countries, since the modern bureaucratic system that separates public officials from politicians has not yet been established, politician-type corruption and bureaucratic corruption are both concerned and criticized. In this situation, the observed probability of corruption is naturally. This is one of the objective but often overlooked important reasons why democracies appear to have less corruption. The lack of transnational cooperation mechanism and the problem of corruption supervision. China is also one of the democracies with a relatively developed bureaucratic system. The social and political structure of big government has a long historical tradition, but the corruption problem in Germany is not serious, and large-scale corruption is relatively rare. Therefore, this brings up such an interesting question: why is the corruption problem in Germany, which is also a democratic country with a well-developed bureaucracy, more effectively solved? This is also an important reason why I bring Germany into the discussion. An explanation of this issue helps us better understand the possible means of effectively addressing corruption in great powers. In general, one of the important ways for Germany to effectively limit corruption comes from the EU's effective corruption control cooperation mechanism. Specifically, on the one hand, the European Commission adopted the Convention on the Protection of Financial Interests of the European Community and the Convention on the Prevention of Bribery of Officials of the European Community and officials of EU member states in 1996 and 1997 respectively. These two treaties unanimously require member states to modify the targets of bribery crimes in their domestic criminal laws, extending from the original officials of their own countries to officials of the European Community and EU member states. In 1998, Germany adopted the Special Criminal Law EU Anti-Corruption Act to incorporate the above-mentioned conventions into the domestic criminal law system. Strasbourg, France, whose purpose is to improve the ability of member states to fight corruption, promote and monitor the implementation of European Council anti-corruption standards by dynamic mutual assessment and peer pressure. On the one hand, it aims to help member states to discover the shortcomings of their domestic anti-corruption policies, and on the other hand, it aims to promote the reform of domestic anti-corruption legislation, judiciary, and system of member states through such measures. The international cooperation mechanism of the EU's anti-corruption policy has formed an effective balance and restriction interaction mechanism from the supervision of the supranational political institutions to the national institutions, and the reverse supervision of the supranational institutions from the national institutions. Further crowding out this creates a space for corruption to occur, and this mechanism cannot be obtained by a single national system and domestic political institutions. This makes it difficult to eliminate corruption in countries with developed bureaucratic systems. It can only be limited as much as possible and difficult to obtain. Solve. Global corruption levels will remain stagnant in 2022 for the 11th consecutive year, with 95% of countries making little progress in the fight against corruption, according to a new report by anti-corruption group Transparency International. The group's annual Corruption Perceptions Index, released on Tuesday, ranks 180 countries and territories by measuring how corrupt the public sector is, with a score of 0 indicating a highly corrupt government and a score of 100 indicating a very clean government. Here are the key takeaways from the report. Denmark scored the highest with 90 points, followed by Finland and New Zealand with 87 points. Somalia scored the lowest at 12, followed by other conflict zones, including Syria and South Sudan, at 13. Corruption indices for the UK, 73, and Qatar, 58, hit record lows. Corruption levels have risen in 31 countries. Corruption levels declined in 25 countries. Sub-Saharan Africa has the lowest average score of 32. Western Europe maintained the highest average score at 66. While Western Europe and the European Union still scored high, Transparency International noted that corruption levels had not improved as governments scrambled to deal with the invasion of Ukraine and the ensuing energy crisis. In the region, Hungary still has the lowest score at 42, where the EU froze funds last year, citing Prime Minister Viktor Orban's failure to tackle corruption and protect human rights. The Americas saw the largest increase in corruption levels last year, although the regional average remained at 43. Cuba, 45th, Guatemala, 24th, and Nicaragua, 19th, all hit record lows, while Honduras, 23rd, and Haiti, 17th, have fallen sharply since 2017. Transparency International notes that economic stagnation coupled with rising levels of corruption has a growing affinity for authoritarianism. The U.S. 2021 score has improved by 2 points since '69, but remains low compared to its score under the Obama administration. Corruption levels improved the most in Afghanistan, improving its score by 2021, despite corruption in the Afghan government that saw the Taliban take over in 2020. The UK was one of the biggest losers on the index, falling 70 points to. While it's difficult to pinpoint the exact factors behind the decline, experts say political turmoil and a battered economy have tarnished the country's reputation as a stable democratic institution.